Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the North Northamptonshire Council Audit and Governance Committee on today, the 12th of August. Welcome councillors, officers and members of the public who are joining us as it's been live streamed on YouTube. Particularly like to thank Andrew Tagg coming from the Children's Trust to present a paper today, and that's really appreciated. I'll just look to the administrator and ask if there are any apologies, and if you could read those out, please, Callum.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Roberts, Councillor Marks and Councillor Jelly for today's meeting. Okay, thank you for that. And are there any declarations of interest that any members have for anything on this agenda? No? Okay, moving to the next agenda item, if we go to the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of June. And if there are any points to be raised from members in relation to those minutes. No. Councillor Hagwell, did you have a point you'd like to raise? Was there a point? Sorry, I didn't see. Did you raise your hand? Was there a point you'd like to raise there?
Only insofar as I seem to be the only other one standing with you that was at that meeting, so I was going to move it. No one else who was at the meeting was here. Okay. I look for a proposer for the minutes, please. A seconder? I assume it has to be someone who was there.
Okay, I'll second them. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Okay. There were a couple of points which flow from that, and and I'll ask. They're kind of intertwined with some points which are on the agenda, but I'll ask for an update on them now. The first one from Claire. As members will have seen, there's been a significant move forward in terms of disaggregation, and I'd be grateful if Claire could give an update to the committee. And I know it's in the process of being formally approved, and then this committee will receive things in due course. But I'll ask Claire now to give us an update. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm really pleased to be able to confirm that we have now agreed the disaggregation of the former County Council balance sheet between the West and the North. So what that is looking at is allocating £950 million worth of indebtedness between both authorities. To put it into context, the indebtedness was 81% of its asset base. So it's not a good balance sheet to actually try and split. And it's quite sensitive in terms of the impact that it may or may not have as a result of those splits on the balance sheet, on the revenue account, particularly going forward in our budget provision. So what we were trying to ensure that we achieved was that we were not creating any financial distress to any of the authorities, and it was done in a fairly cost-neutral environment. So our focus was ensuring that neither party was at any financial detriment than I suppose they already are incurring from the existing balance sheet, because it's not a good balance sheet to split in terms of what we've inherited. So from North Northamptonshire's perspective, we've taken 36% of that capital financing requirement. Our asset base is actually 41%, so it's significantly lower than that. And just to sort of put it into context, so obviously we were trying to ensure that this did not go to arbitration. If arbitration was minded to use our asset base in its totality, that would be another £50 million on top of the sum that we've already agreed. And if they were decided or mindful that to argue a 50-50 split was actually more reasonable to ensure that no authority was financially to any detriment, and would be another £130 million on top of that. So as we start to escalate through those numbers, we can sort of see that what that would do would create a massive pressure for the budget side in ongoing minimum revenue provision to the residents of North Northamptonshire. So what we've managed to do is to keep it within our current budget envelope, and also to negotiate other items on the balance sheet which are going to be beneficial in terms of splitting deferred capital receipts as well. So that's really positive as well from our perspective in landing that balance sheet. So most of the balance sheet was already agreed. It was just purely the technical side of it in terms of the capital financing requirements. So I'm really pleased to be able to convey this to you today.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I'll just see if members have got any questions on that. It's obviously a significant step forward and enables us to move other things forward as well. I don't know if there are any questions. I had a couple. I don't know if you mentioned the figures, but in the reports I saw it showed what our gearing level was going to be. And I understand it was about 71%. I'd just like to get your views on that, because I was doing a little bit of reading around, and it was identifying that people generally perceive councils to be high risk if their gearing's over 50%, and they should aim to be between 25 and 50. I know it's a function of history. I just wondered, from a Section 151 officer's position, what's your view on that, and what's the longer term outlook on that? Where could we go with this?
So it is a significant challenge, hence why it has taken us a significant length of time to obviously be able to negotiate this and actually agree the final position. What I would say in this space, it's one component part of a combined balance sheet. So what we will see is, once we start to move into the Northamptonshire Council's accounts, is that the inherited balance sheets that we'll be amalgamating with all the district and boroughs will help to reduce that indebtedness. So I've got confidence that we will be, whilst it's not a good financial position to take, but it will be something we'll be able to manage over the medium-term financial period. But it is something that we are, unfortunately, committing ourselves to over a 50-year period. So that's the really big, tough challenge in this, is that it's not just something we can deal with today or tomorrow. It's something that will stay with us for quite a number of years.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll go to Councillor Hagwell and then Councillor Eakins afterwards. Thank you.
And thank you for that. I have to admit, I've never really understood the detriment to one or the other, and how we've not had a detriment, but not for this afternoon. I don't understand it had to be one way or the other. But, and this may be from our accountant colleagues as well, when will it ripple through? Because we now go back to April the 1st, always an interesting date, 2021, and now we've split it. What work needs to go on to create accounts that are giving a true record as opposed to not? When will we see that? And do we perceive any unpleasant surprises in doing that work coming out of the end? And someone please give me the questions I need to ask at the end of it.
Thank you, through you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know that obviously we had an estimated split of the balance sheet that we've already incorporated into our draft accounts. So the finalisation of these won't make a significant difference to where we actually estimated those balances to be. There'll be some that may move more than others. For example, capital receipts that we weren't expecting to be able to negotiate, and similarly within our reserves. But it's generally the unusable reserves, as we've just spoke about, that will probably move in order to compensate for that. So the movements that we've got going through the balance sheet will not necessarily cause us any issues in terms of the draft. It's just now flushing those all through, which we now have agreement to. So once we get the signed off agreement on Thursday, all of those transactions that are currently being worked on can be flushed through the account. So that will hit 21, 22, 22, 23 and 23, 24.
Thank you for that. Councillor Eakins?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure it's going to be relevant though, but when we disaggregated and they've got high-ticket items such as Angel Square, where we still have joint services, i.e. just for pensions, so pensions still work for the north as well as it does for the west. So how do those values get split out? Because obviously there's a lot of finance and costings involved in Angel Square, plus a couple of other big buildings over at the west that we I presume still liable for in some way or form.
So all of those transactions, so the one Angel Square in particular is an asset that's the west asset. Anything else that we've now operationally moved into a shared service arrangement where they've been fully disaggregated, we would be paying rent for. So it's moved into operation as normal, as you would expect in any other local authority, so we would then pay any rental if that's appropriate. In terms of pensions, so the West are the accountable body for the pension, administer the pension, as they would have done before, so it makes no difference to us. So the actuary is then tasked with then providing that split between the West and the North, which we already have and we've already acquired, and it's already part and parcel of our balance sheet already.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll continue in a second, Councillor Hegwell. There was a point which you helped me with, and I think it'd be useful if you explained to the committee how this flows through to the minimum revenue provision and what that means in terms of council tax, because there's a cost at the end of the line to this, to taxpayers, and if you could just explain how that. Obviously, we're talking about the disaggregation of the balance sheet, which is splitting out some debt, but this comes through into not an accounting concept, but cash, which is reality, and cash paid by taxpayers. Could you just explain that and the quantum of the number involved, please?
Thank you, Chair. So that's not a problem. So the premise around how you finance the purchase of an asset for local authorities falls out as the capital financing requirement. So if we buy a building for 100 million and we have to borrow for that, then the capital financing requirement is 100 million. If there's any contribution for grant funding, it will then reduce that amount that we would have as an indebtedness. What we would then look to do is that capital financing requirement is the number that we will base our minimum revenue provision. So we have to, as part of the accounting regulations, set aside almost like a mortgage payment of what we would want to set aside to pay down this debt over time. Majority of items that you're going to purchase is going to be for physical assets like property, land, and the maximum that we can take those over is 50 years. So what we will then do is look to set aside 1/50th of that borrowing debt, and we have to set aside that provision as part of our council tax setting requirement. So, for example, if we have an indebtedness of 340 million, we would have to set aside about 6.5 million of that in our budget. So the council taxpayers are paying for that investment that the council has made over the next 50 years. So it's very keen for us to ensure that we keep that to a minimum, that we're not overburdening the council taxpayer, which is, again, one of the real big issues why we're making sure that we weren't doing it to the detriment of the council taxpayer or the organisations as well. So making sure that we weren't making either organisation, be it the West or the North, financially unsustainable going forward. But the balance sheet, as you quite rightly said, is not a very good balance sheet to split anyway. So what we've managed to do is to negotiate a minimum revenue provision that's already within the envelope of our current budget.
And bringing those systems to a close and coming on to Northamptonshire specific systems. During the year, you implemented a new cash receipting system and you implemented a new revenue and benefit system. So we're going to undertake some work on those to ensure that they've been implemented correctly. Also, we make reference to the opening balances. When this report was written, we were unsure, and to be fair, we are still unsure what work we are required to do on the opening balances. So that's another area of risk. Coupled with that, on page 31, you still, and it's tied into your legacy systems, you still operate multiple ledgers. You have a main Northamptonshire ledger, but you use the old legacy ones for the revenue and benefit system while you've transitioned and harmonised your council tax. So that makes the audit more complex because there's more opportunities for things to go wrong, even though I think effectively the old legacy ledgers are being used as a pass-through from the old legacy revenue benefit system into the new ledger, but we need to get an understanding of them and audit those. And then the other risk is disaggregation. Obviously, that's now coming to a close, but what we'll need to do is look at what was the agreed figures and make sure they flow through into the 23-24 accounts. Our approach to materiality is a standard approach. The figures that are quoted in here will change slightly once we receive the accounts. We've also updated our guidance around audits that are affected by the backstop, and we've capped those levels, so they will be coming down very slightly for that. And I think that's about it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Just look to see if members have got any questions. Councillor Whitworth, and then I'll go to Councillor Hakewell. Sorry.
Not quite, Councillor Whitworth.
Mike Richards. Sorry.
Just a quick question. You mentioned the legacy ledgers. What's our plan to move off those and move on to a sort of a sustainable format going forward, so we're not having 5 or 6 different ledgers?
Okay, I think I'll ask Claire to address that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as Paul alluded to, the Rebs and Bens team are currently working through migrating the old Rebs and Bens systems onto one platform. Once that's been achieved, then all the ledgers then from a district and borough environment can then be switched off. So we've already archived Corby Borough Council's old ledger, so that's already been moved and migrated across to the new Rebs and Bens system. So these systems, or the ledgers, are just being used as like a dummy account in terms of process. So it's very hard to unhook something from a quite complex Rebs and Bens system. So from a risk environment, it was easier just to use them as a bit of a dummy holding account and pump them into ERP Gold. So we're now migrating, I think, Kettering, East Northampton, then it'll be Wellingborough. So by December this year, I want to say that will be achieved.
Thank you for that. I'll go to Councillor Hakewell and then Councillor Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 27. There we are looking at the valuation of land and buildings and investment properties. Not anecdotally, but practically, there are areas of land in NNC's ownership. Thinking of one site in Desborough, which was £2 million value in 2004 and remains unused. First question is, how do we value that? We've attempted to sell it for various things and failed. I find it difficult to know how something like that is valued, and there are other pieces of land in that category. But on page 27, we will, I like that, we will ensure that all valuation information in the 5 spreadsheet fixed asset registers is appropriately brought to account. Now, with 3 years on, and we've got 5 spreadsheets, Chairman, it's a bit like previous discussions, surely, understanding our assets, we should have all those 5 in a single fixed asset register to allow us to ask the questions that we're all being told to ask about how things are moving forward. And my subsidiary question there is, if I remember rightly, in the previous authorities, 20% of our fixed assets were valued every year. So over a 5-year period rolling, you ended up with your fixed assets valued. So that just does concern me, and it says a significant risk. We don't know what our assets are, and if I asked you now, 5 spreadsheets would have to be magically opened. So through you, Chair, maybe, I don't know exactly how we do this on this committee, but I would suggest a report on how soon we're going to get a single fixed asset register. So how do we value? When are we going to get one fixed asset register which values land across all the previous 5 in a coordinated way? Because I'm assuming this is all on the balance sheet.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I ask the Section 151 officer to answer that, I had a linked one, so I'll bring it in at this point. Obviously, one of the problems we had with the district and boroughs was the valuation. So, and that caused a delay to the delays for the clearance of those. I'm wondering how big an issue that might be for us, because that caused us, when we was clearing the reports with EY, especially especially the latter Corby ones. It was a real problem. So I'm looking for a bit of assurance there as well. As do we think this is going to be repeating itself, or do we feel we're in a better position? And obviously, Councillor Hakewell's questions as well. So you've got about 3 or 4 points to roll into one there. So sorry about that. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, through you, Chair. If I take the first part of the question, and hopefully Claire will be able to help with the second part. So, in terms of bringing those asset registers together, yes, you're right. That's work we need to do. As you'll appreciate, we have, with the resources we've got, we've focused on those priorities around disaggregation, the new income management system, and producing the sets of accounts for 21-22, 22-23, and 23-24. And making sure that infrastructure's there within the systems to make sure that we're able to hit those deadlines moving forward. So that's been our priority to date. Once we've gone through the audit process for 23-24, then our aim is then to bring all those asset registers together. So we've got one asset register moving forward, and to make that process more efficient too.
Okay.
The 5.
Sorry.
Every asset. We can't value every asset in 1 year.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. So we have a valuation programme which is supported with our property team. We use an external valuer who will work through those asset valuations over a 5-year period. Our investment properties will be valued every year, and we'll do the 5-year programme will cover 20% of our properties each year, so that over that period we value all our assets.
Okay, and just the point I raised about the experience we had with the districts and boroughs, and there was a big valuation issue there, which the auditors picked up some points on. Do you feel comfortable about those?
From my perspective, yes. I think what we found difficult with was the valuer that we were particularly using with Ernest & Young's team. We've now had a lot closer working relationship with Grant Thornton in terms of the sort of valuations and being mindful in terms of the information that's been provided to try and eliminate that risk up front, and having those conversations, quite working collaboratively with Paul's team around some of the things that could be considered high risk. So whether that's using beacon approach for your housing stock to the high-end investment properties, and making sure that we don't fall into that same narrative and same conversations, and we can deal with it up front. And building that relationship between our valuer who we're using and our external auditor to avoid those questions going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Lee?
Yes, it was about a point made by Michael about merging the 4 systems. A few weeks ago, customer services could not use those systems, the revenue and benefit system. It was out of action for the 3rd week running, I believe, when I visited customer services, because they just tried to merge the address function. I emailed Councillor Bundy about that, saying that IT needed a lot more support, to invest a lot more support in merging those systems, because I could anticipate serious problems for merging those systems. So I hope that by December it'll be completed, but I hope it's up and running again, because the backlog that was building up was awful.
Through you, Chair. What I want to say about that is that unfortunately it's down to the testing of the actual systems. So they had to test the data and migrate the data across to the new system. So yes, it was down for a time, but it was planned. And I think, like you say, it does then have an effect on the backlog, but it's trying to do that as effectively and efficiently as we can. But unfortunately, we can't not test that data when we're migrating it across. So there isn't consequences to our actions, but we're trying to get through it as quickly as we can and hopefully avoid those issues going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll just look and see if there's any more questions or comments. If not, the recommendation is that the Audit and Governance Committee notes the external audit plan for 23-24. If I could look for a proposer for that, please. Councillor Eakins as seconder. Councillor Lee, thank you. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. That's Carried. So if we move on to the next agenda item, which is the Northamptonshire Children's Trust Annual Internal Audit Report and Opinion for 23-24. And I'm very grateful that Andrew Tagg has attended. He always attends when asked to, and he's going to present this report. I'll probably make some comments afterwards, but I'll mention it now that it's a bit disappointing that the internal auditor, I'm sure you're capable of presenting it, but the internal auditor is unable to attend today, and I'll make some comments about that later as well. Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give an update to the committee, thank you very much for inviting me along to the committee. I always think it's a good opportunity to share the work of the Trust and take questions from the committee on the progress. So over the last 2 years, we've had some concerns over the delivery of the audit services. I'm pleased to say that we now have got a full set of audits completed. We've now received the draft audit for the budget monitoring, which won't change the opinion that you've received today, and that's an opinion of reasonableness. We have now engaged really strongly with the new Chief Internal Auditor from West Northamptonshire, who are the providers of our audit service. We have got dedicated audit capacity, and the audit team have prioritised the completion of those audits. The audits have been incredibly robust and worked through, and as the auditors and the service move together to get a deeper understanding of the audits, it does provide a very solid opinion on the audit position of the Trust. Just to say that the work of the internal audit is just part of the overall governance structure of the Trust. There's a myriad of different governance arrangements around KPI performance in relation to the contract, and then Ofsted performance as well, and Ofsted monitoring. And just an update from last year to this year, we have now had 2 audits this year carried out by Ofsted. Those were both fostering and the youth offending service. The fostering service moved from inadequate to good. The youth offending service was also good, and our children's homes are in the majority good, with one requires improvement to be good. This is on the back of the overarching ILACS framework that moved the Children's Trust in 2022 from inadequate to requires improvement to be good. We are due to receive our next ILACS inspection at the latter part of 2025 or early 2026. So there's an incredible amount of insurance and governance activity that also supports the work of internal audit in looking at areas to investigate and ensuring that they use their resources most effectively to target the risk areas within the Trust as we plan the audits going forward. As we've just sort of talked about external audit, we have now our accounts published for the 2020-21 financial year. That was a 17-month period, and also for the 22-23 financial period. Both of those have been published. Those are both unqualified opinion, and those are both within Companies House. We're in the process at the moment with the 23-24 audit, external audit report, and we're looking to conclude that at the end of August for September to feed into both of the councils' production of their 23-24 audits. So at the moment, and we're just a couple of weeks away from closure, there's no significant issues been raised, so we are expecting an unqualified opinion again as we move forward. So just dovetailing all the reports that we produce, we believe that there's a solid set of performance, and as we've developed our 24-25 audit plan, we have targeted those at the key risk areas within the Trust around independent residential placements, independent fostering, children's homes, and the recruitment and retention of staff. Just to jump back and just to pick on just a couple of the reports, there is a report about the medium-term financial plan. It was a very evolving process over the first 2 years. There was a number of recommendations about creating a reserve for placement demand that was put into the contract sum. On the back of the, there was always a medium-term financial plan produced that was within the business plan. Following the conclusion of the contract sum negotiations on the 30th of November 2023, we produced the detailed medium-term financial plan that was submitted to the councils in the second week of December to go into their medium-term financial plans. Due to the volatility and challenges around placement demand, which is experienced
at the level of competence, I thought he was ambitious in what he was going to be able to deliver, because there was a lot of audits to do in a very limited time, and he's had very serious staffing requirements, and that's reflected in Grant Thornton's report, and I believe they're still there, and that's why I'm a bit disappointed that the head of internal audit, despite being invited, was unable to attend, and he hasn't made it clear if he will be able to attend in future, and I think we should take that up with the council, because he's an important source of assurance for us. So then that caused me to look at what's in the report as well. The first thing I'd raise is, because it's not risk-based, is that limited number of audits enough to deliver that level of assurance? I think that's a fair challenge, and I believe your committee challenged on that as well. So that would be one. And then I had a really significant concern about the medium-term financial planning. And I'd take assurance from what you're saying about what you're doing going forward, but that only really came in Q4 2023. And when I read the BDO report, it said that all the budget setting was done by reference to the medium-term financial plan, but that wasn't in place when they were doing their budget setting. So I think BDO got that wrong, and I would have liked to have been able to challenge the head of internal audit on that report. I don't know if you've got any comments or observations on that, because I know when we spoke to you previously, we challenged about, the overspend is controlled in a way by one of the key controls is the medium-term financial plan, and that was what was missing there before, and it wasn't. So that's where I've got concerns, because we're looking for that level of assurance over the plans, really, and internal audit delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll probably do two points, if that's okay. Go back to the first point and then talk about the medium-term financial plan. In terms of the audit arrangements between our internal audit team and the trust, we've got dedicated resource. We've got the same resource working on the audits. They're getting an in-depth knowledge now of children's services, because the more that you can understand the complexities of children's services, the more valuable the audit process is. So I think that's good to have that continuity. We've got a dedicated auditor now leading on the Children's Trust work. That may have been but we were really clear, the committee were really clear, the previous chair, the new chair, who has come from an audit commission background, that was one of the key priorities as we were looking to strengthen the board, that we had somebody with that skill set, and that is a really sort of great appointment for the trust. But we've got a dedicated resource. We have got our audits completed. The breadth and depth of those combined with the other areas of assurance give a good level of assurance across a wider piece. That's from the work of the safeguarding teams, the work of the inspection, and then a really rigorous external audit process as we are as an independent company. So in terms of the overall governance landscape, there is a lot of assurance channels that supports the internal audit opinion. As we were developing the 23-24 programme and 24-25 programme, we obviously took that feedback to ensure that we were focused on the key risk areas and that is reflected in the 24-25 plan and also the 23-24 plan as well, that we are focusing on the key risks around financial management and other areas within the service about how we use our resources effectively, and how have we got the controls in place to monitor those. So in terms of that assurance framework, I think we've got that. In terms of the medium-term financial plan, there has always been a medium-term financial plan. The first contract sum submission in November 21 of the trust that was put in place, submitted for the first contract sum process for the 22-23 financial year, had a 40-page medium-term financial plan that clearly articulated the risks around placement demand, the risks around some of the pressures that were coming through in terms of inflation. There was a decision made, though, as part of the contract sum negotiations. We were 4 months into, in some ways, the setup of the trust from April 21 through to September 21, that at that stage it was very difficult to really articulate and demonstrate that the demand was to come. So we recommended at that stage that there was a reserve that was put in place around placements. That was captured in the medium-term financial plan. There was a number of scenarios that were put in place, and then as we moved through into 22-23, that process continued, and then that was funded on actuals when those actuals come through at that stage in terms of placement demand. When we have placements in excess of £1 million per young person, the forecasting the challenge is incredibly difficult. The numbers that we forecast in 21-22 and 22-23 for the children in care, those population numbers have been quite solid. The real challenge is one placement could be £364, which is internal fostering, or it could be a placement of £20,000 per week. So the numbers and the volume as we move through have been quite robust in that forecast. What we hadn't forecast in 2021, 22 and 2023 was the real impact and the lack of placements and the more complex needs coming out as a result of COVID, and then the lack of local provision or specialist provision that we are attributing into. So there was always a medium-term financial plan, but once we got the structural deficit into the contract for 24-25, that allowed us to produce an incredibly detailed medium-term financial plan that we will be reforecasting on a 4-monthly basis.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I think you meant, I do acknowledge that there's big steps forward with that medium-term financial plan going forward, and I think that's an improvement. And the risk base for 24-25. I do challenge, though, I think you mentioned 23-24 was risk-based. I don't think it was. That was the previous auditor, and then when I attended that audit committee, he acknowledged that that wasn't a risk-based audit plan. So I don't think that I think that was not correct.
I suppose, sorry, I didn't mean to cut across. Just in terms of our approach, we were within the trust in developing that, quite right, that there was a risk workshop to develop the 24-25. We were really keen in developing the audit plan for 23-24 with the key risks that we had from our internal risk register, strategic risk register at that time, the medium-term financial plan, budget management, and some of the other developments about the case management system and some of the areas that we were looking to put in place. So we drove that process in conjunction with the auditors. I think we've evolved that process now to have that workshop with the board. We've now got 9 strategic risks across the trust, the separate risk registers for each of the other areas, for some of the other project areas, but we've now got 9 strategic risks, and all audits have got a link to that strategic risk register as we go forward of the trust.
Yeah, I think that's very positive thing to report going forward. I know Rachel attended one with me, and I think you've attended other ones as well. I don't know if you had any feedback or observations from the audit committees that you attended at NCT. That'd be valuable for you to give us your view. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I did attend this meeting. As you say, I've attended on a regular basis whenever there's an audit element to the meeting. So when this went to the committee in June, I think it was June? Yeah. So I did attend and I had an opportunity to ask questions as well, and I actually asked a similar question around the risk-based approach to the audit plan development for 23-24, and it was useful to get the feedback from the committee and the auditor as well on that, which aligns with Andrew's response today, really. So yes, that's been helpful. I also now receive copies of all of the reports and the terms of references for the audits as well, and I think that's a good move forward and enables us to understand where that assurance is coming from and what it's based on as well. So I think that's been a positive move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll just look to members, see if they've got any other points that they'd like to raise. Okay. Not Councillor Whitworth.
Thank you.
Councillor Whitworth, thank you.
Been demoted. This may have nothing to do with you, so please, in the interest of time, just say no. But are you involved in the alternative provisions for schooling as well as the fostering and this kind of stuff? Because what we're finding in Wellingborough, certainly in the schooling, is there's an increasing number of pupils who are having difficulties and are being expelled, but the alternative provisions are classed as unsatisfactory by Ofsted, so there's nowhere really to send them, and they're being placed then by the council in what we would consider inappropriate settings. So do you deal with the alternative provisions that school pupils would go to?
So the responsibility for provision for alternative provision sits with the DCS within the council, the social care function. But there is a big sort of read across, and we see this as a really big partnership with health as well, about ensuring that we've got local provision, because one of the knock-on effects is if there is no local provision, those children have to stay in care. If that's a child in care that's coming through. So it's really important that the three components of education, health and social care work really closely together. But the direct provision of alternative provision does sit within the councils through their responsibility for education. But there is a knock-on effect. We've all got a responsibility as a corporate parent for all the children in our care, and there's a number of children in care that are also in excluded provision as well, or residential special provision. So the links are really, really close, and that's something that we're always keen to develop.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I come to the recommendation, I think I'm very grateful that you've come here and presented, but it'd be like our Section 151 officer presenting Rachel's report, which so I think we'll formally ask again for the internal auditor to attend for future ones, and we hope that we'll be able to resolve that. I think one other thing I took some assurance from was, and it will be reflected later when we talk about our resourcing. And when I spoke to the chair, he gave me some assurance about things which we're developing as well, which was apparently you're developing a workforce plan, and obviously one of the key controls is a workforce plan when you're trying to control levels of expenditure. And a significant amount of your expenditure is your workforce. So I took some assurance that is on your agenda and you're going to be delivering that. I wondered if you could give us a little bit of an update on that and the status of it, because that will give us further assurance that we're seeing better controls coming in and controls over your workforce and a longer term plan there. That'd be helpful, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. The development of the workforce plan is a real key next step for the trust as it moves forward. Northamptonshire previously, and then when the trust was set up, had a significant requirement for the use of agency social workers. We're all aware through various reports the cost of employing an agency social worker is 30% above the cost of that, not also the really being embedded and being really strong and having those foundations in the trust and developing. So what we've got now this year is a real target. There was an initiative that was last week about refer a social worker. Our campaigns are ongoing around recruitment and retention. We've got an incredibly positive media position. The Ofsted reports, the implementation or the announcement of the social care management system that you saw within the audit reports is a really sizable increase in recruitment activity. One of the reasons why social workers wouldn't come to Northamptonshire, there was a number of issues, caseloads that we've been managed to drive down, was the social care management system that they were using. So it's really positive that that's been announced. So currently within the trust there's 132 agency staff. Apart from frontline social workers, there's only 5 agency staff across the rest of the trust. So we've got a target to reduce that significantly, and we are making inroads. On the 1st of May, there was 144 agency staff. We've now managed to convert 12 of those agency staff to permanent. We will continue with that journey. So the more positivity about the journey of the trust has a real knock-on impact, and we are seeing the social workers making the conscious choice to move from agency to permanent. Apart from the really difficult areas to recruit, and that is children in court team, that's also prevention and safeguarding. Those are the most challenging front-facing social workers. There is a national shortage. There is now no further advertisement for agency staff in all the other posts within social work. That's fostering, adoption, and some of the other areas that we look to develop. But this is a partnership, and we're looking to the councils both to support that recruitment, really positive messages just around the sort of the progress of the trust. Obviously the Ofsted inspections are a really good external view of that, but we are looking to do that. The Chief Executive continues to call anybody who expresses an interest in coming to the trust to thank them for their application, the LinkedIn profile. So we are looking to develop that process. We did put a bid in for additional resources for apprenticeships, and we're looking to see how we can really develop that social work academy. The big challenge around that is financial resources. We need to have the social workers in post and to take a caseload to ensure that the caseloads are safe and deliverable, and they are really going in the right way now. But to create that capacity about grow your own and how we can do that in sort of the contract sum within a really tight financial envelope. But that's really developing, and we are taking a sort of a granular review of each agency placement. That has to go through a panel every single Friday for the recruitment of an agency, and the question is every single time has the conversation to move to permanent been really good. And where we can step down agency, we will always step down agency as we promote that. That puts a significant drain on the financial resources of the trust with that 30% premium, but say that will be relaunched, and we will look to develop. We had the workforce plan initially to stabilise, to ensure that caseloads were managed well. It's now moving forward as we move forward to the next ILACS inspection, and hopefully sort of getting to good, which will be a seismic improvement with the trust on its journey.
Okay, I think Councillor Hakewell has a question.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that historically was a problem was the software, the system that social workers had to work with or sweat with, I think was part of it. And from the beginning of the establishment of the authority, there has been comment on a regular basis about money, funds, and changing the legacy system into something new. Where are we with that as an incentive to social workers wanting to come and work with us? And secondly, is the apprenticeship, is that a levy that we, chairman, as a council, have a deduction, don't we, for an apprenticeship levy, which if we don't spend it goes back to the Treasury, heaven forbid. Does the apprenticeships, that's the second question, encompass that funding to help you do that? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Andrew to answer that one, and I'll let Claire answer the point on the apprenticeship levy.
So in terms of the system, both councils have worked really well with the trust. There was a charm system for fostering adoption that was implemented last year. The impact of that system allowed us, was a significant part or a good part of getting to good. There has now been the announcement of the preferred supplier for the case management system that will be implemented in 2025, and both councils through their respective capital programmes have really sort of got behind that and pushed that forward. A really robust challenge and robust procurement exercise to get us in, and we are in a really, really good position now that we can go out to prospective employees and say by 2025 you'll have one of the market leader social care improvement systems. One of the benefits from that is there is a lot of duplication that sits within the trust about working across 5 different systems, the manual inputs that we discussed earlier. In terms of the employment levy, the trust has got a levy that it uses, and that is for the training of the social workers. What we're looking to do is to create some capacity for additional posts for those social workers as they come for the system. That isn't attributable to the levy, but that's how we can balance between the overarching employee budget as we drive cases down, as we recruit there, that whether we can create a cohort of social work apprenticeship posts to grow your own and as they move forward into the trust. But that will create an additional burden, and we're just looking about how we can offset that as we reduce the agency costs. But that will go through as part of the contract sum. But the apprenticeship levy, we've got our apprenticeship levy, that's top sliced, and we use that for the training aspects as we can do and can apply that.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously Northamptonshire also has its own apprenticeship levy, which it will obviously continue to use for training within staff of Northamptonshire.
We can't cross-match it to the Children's Trust if the Children's Trust reached out.
I'm not an expert on it, so if that is possible, we haven't explored that at the moment, but it's something I can ask our HR colleagues to advise and provide you an answer on.
Thank you, Chair, because I think there was some leniency about that, but that would certainly, if there's a discussion between the Trust and ourselves, if those resources, particularly the Social Work Academy. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So the recommendation is that we note the annual internal audit report and opinion for Northamptonshire's Children's Trust for 23-24. I think we should add that we've got some reservations there, and I think they're obviously reflected in when you look at the compliance or partial and non-compliance of audit with standards there, you know. So, but I do think we should add that there is. We can also observe that it's moving forward at a bit more pace now, and so we can identify that. So, if I could look for somebody to propose that, please. Councillor Lee, somebody to second. Councillor Anslow, thank you. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. And if we could move on to the next agenda item, which is the Strategic Risk Register update, and I invite Rachel to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the latest update on the Council Strategic Risk Register. So a copy is provided as Appendix 1 in the usual format that the committee will be familiar with. And it's just an update really on where we are in terms of those risk register entries. So obviously this does remain subject to ongoing review and update during the period whilst you obviously receive this on a quarterly basis. And I've tried to set out for you any of the changes, any of the key changes to the risk entries since the last time it was presented to this committee in the covering report in Table 1 on page 60 of the papers. So you will note that there is a new risk entry in relation to SEND. So members of the committee will recall I did bring an internal audit report on SEND in 23-24 since the last risk register update, which gave a limited assurance and a high organisational impact opinion. And under the risk management strategy that this committee approved earlier in this calendar year, that then prompts a consideration of whether or not it should be factored onto the strategic risk register as well. So as a result of that, it was agreed that it should be reflected, and a risk has been entered as risk entry number 21 on the risk register. So also in relation to feedback from the last time this came to the committee as the risk register update, there was a request from members of the committee that consideration be given again to whether or not there should be a risk reflecting the changes in leadership, turnover and gaps in senior management roles in particular. So again, this was taken back to the corporate leadership team for discussion, and as a result, risk number 11 has been updated in terms of its content to include some reference to filling those corporate leadership network vacancies as well. But the risk score remains at 12 at the time of producing this report. So those are the key updates, Chair, and I'm happy, as usual, to take any questions. But as always, the risk register and the entries all belong to corporate leadership team, and I would need to take questions probably away to the risk owners and feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that update, Rachel. Just look to members, see if they've got any questions. Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I think we spoke briefly after the meeting last time that SEND is a council responsibility. That's correct, yeah. I've just noticed anecdotally, and this is more an observation, that, and I mentioned to Andrew, the increasing number of expulsions from schools, that certainly the two schools that I deal with, and of those numbers, there's an increasing percentage of SEND pupils. One of the main reasons we think is because it takes so long to get an actual diagnosis from the initial point of concern. And I'm just wondering, is that something which falls within the remit of the council? Because we're basically saying there are issues, and then the issues are sort of getting out of hand, so they're having to be expelled, and we can't do some things because there's no diagnosis, and the diagnosis is taking 2 to 3 years or something. Is that a council issue, or is that something that's more in the sort of the medical side of things?
Okay, thank
through
you.
you, Chair. I would obviously need to refer to the specialists in that area as to where different elements come in, whether there's a medical element, as you say, or health input. But certainly in terms of our responsibilities as a council, there is a responsibility around assessing special educational needs and developing that educational health and care plan, which we end up with as a result. So that's where, obviously in the audit last year, we identified there were some delays in that process. So I don't know if those are the delays that we're looking at potentially, but as I say, I'd be happy to go away and get some further response on the detail of some of those, the diagnosis, I suppose, rather than the assessment of the plan.
Yeah.
So I can
I think it is probably more the diagnosis side of things in so much that because there's no diagnosis, although we're pretty sure there should be, the pupils are being sent to inappropriate educational areas, or actually they're being sent to mainstream schools initially when those aren't the right places for those children. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Anslow, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to come in on that one, actually. I think it's to do with health, and it's where the council can or cannot work alongside with the health with provision, because if it's an EHCP, there has to be a report by health professionals. Yeah. So maybe that's the question that we need to be asking, is how robust is the relationship between the council and their part in SEND, and what's provided by the health services. Maybe that's a question we could ask.
Certainly. So if we could ask Rachel to organise a response to the committee from the relevant officer to explain and answer those questions. Thank you. Just look to see Councillor Level.
Thank you. Nothing to do with the risks, but you will know that I have been campaigning for a long time to make sure that information like this is on a 5, which is fantastic, but I'm never satisfied. Could we please have the even number of pages, not upside down?
Okay, thank you.
Obviously feed that back to DEM services.
Yes, I realise that you didn't actually do the printing.
Okay, so if we go back to the recommendation, oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Councillor Lee, then Councillor Haigwell. All right, whichever way. Councillor Haigwell, then.
Thank you. On item 11, and there's a link in this, which talks of inadequate organisational capacity, we all got from the leader on the 18th of April a list of the corporate organisation, the different aspects, key contact information and so on. And the last part of that was, I will send you revised versions as soon as there are any changes. We've had multiple changes since then. I don't know if the portfolio holder keeps up with this, but we've had people leave and we're interviewing and so on. 18th of April, May, June, July, August, 4 months ago. I don't know if we can just request that the leader keeps to the promise there. And I make that point because it's crucial for us as councillors to know who are in the senior positions when we have inquiries coming in. So that's question number 1. I quite like the upside down bit. I've coped now. I can even read it. Capacity is not on page 66. Capacity is not prioritised in the areas which the outcomes and ensure service delivery. So that was item 11. Item 19, lack of specialist resource and capacity in the delivery of critical pay and grading project. Item 21, the ability to undertake assessments in a timely manner. This is further complicated by insufficient resources to meet those needs once identified. And we heard also that the fixed asset register had to be a balance with our finance colleagues between doing other things like disaggregation. All of this tells me, and maybe the portfolio holder can comfort us here, that the executive are not giving the organisation the resources and the people that we need to end up in a committee like this with the right reports. So 3 occasions there, Chairman, where we are just don't have the resources, and it's no good saying if we hit an iceberg that the crew weren't on board at the time. Lastly, on page 69, Appendix 2, risk heat map. I would call that a risk wildfire map. It's not just heat. When you look at 08 on page 69, Council is forecasting an in-year overspend general fund of 11 million as at period 10. The dedicated schools grant is forecasting an overspend of 9 million at period 10. Chairman, we sometimes talk about a few $100,000 here or there, but that risk is shown as high and very likely. When we look at these particular risks, and I thank you for giving us the data because I complained earlier about not clearly being able to see the data, there is nothing that's a low or a negligible risk of the 21 that are shown there. So when we conclude this item, if I go back to one of the things that we were told when we had scrutiny training was that we should never note anything. We should look at these reports and say, actually, I pick out number 8, overspend, and we should do something about it. We don't come here to Corby just to note that there is a risk assessment there, which may or may not be, from a Grant Thornton colleague's point of view, similar to many other councils, but that is crucial. You know, item 08 high, very likely, and we are showing 11 plus 9, 20 million overspend. So I don't know, Chairman, how we run that through, but at the same time, it would be interesting to hear whether the portfolio holder thinks we've got enough resources to run the ship.
Okay. I consider some of those are scrutiny questions. So there's scrutiny, and they're not for. They're not. Then I think we had some training about understanding the responsibilities of audit and sources of assurance on the one level, and then scrutinising things on another level. And and obviously the policyholders here in an observation capacity is not here to answer questions, so I'm afraid I can't ask him to answer anything there.
Sorry,
okay, Councillor Lee.
Sorry, the portfolio holder can't answer questions.
He's not here to answer any questions, no.
What is he here for?
He's here to observe.
Sorry?
He's here in an observation capacity. Okay, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. It's item 7 combined with 14, really. 14, I'm concerned that the disaggregation, that we have a huge lack of IT staff after the disaggregation, because apparently we have 35 IT staff, whereas West Northants have about 300, and after disaggregation that will be a real concern about how is that again scrutiny, is that again a scrutiny issue. It's just I would have coloured that red, 14, not yellow, because I think that is a serious risk.
Okay, I'll ask Claire to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think in the context of what we're looking at, the IT has not fully disaggregated yet, so it's obviously working towards that. And within the current budget, within 24-25, we have incorporated the IT strategy. So as that starts to ramp up and the disaggregation starts to come down, you'll have a crossover of resources in that space. So as we're starting to see now as part of implementing that work, we're now starting to see a lot more resources come into the IT space. But if we then disaggregate, what should happen is those resources that are within the disaggregation envelope would chupi across into North Northants, who are currently delivering that service.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move to the recommendation. It's recommended that the committee note the risk management update. If I go to look for a proposer, Councillor Level, and seconder, Councillor Eakins. All those in favour, please show. Any against? Thank you. Sorry, let me just check the numbers there. Let me redo that again. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. And those against? And you's against, did you say? Yeah, okay. Thank you. And just note those. Okay, so the next agenda item is the internal audit progress report, which I'll ask Rachel to present. And obviously we have some limited assurance in these. Ordinarily we invite the relevant officers to attend. I wonder if we could, because obviously we don't have those here today, so I wondered if when you come to that point, if you can tell us what the status of that is, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the latest update on internal audit activity. So in the usual format that the committee will be familiar with from page 77, at the start of the Appendix 1. So a copy of the internal audit plan, as usual, is provided on pages 88 onwards and shows you the status of each of the assignments as at the time of producing this report and the outcome of those which have already been finalised as well. So all of those that have been finalised during the period are summarised as usual in terms of the key findings from the audit in section 3 within the appendix. So we've had 8 audit assignments which have been finalised since the last meeting. And just running briefly through these, the first is the one that the Chair referenced, which received an opinion of limited assurance for compliance. So this was in relation to agency workers and consultants. So this is a review that was a follow-up audit really from a limited assurance report that was issued in 2022-23, in August 23, sorry. And that also received an assurance opinion of limited assurance. So as part of this audit, we wanted to review the progress that had been made and give an updated assurance opinion. So we were able to note improvements in terms of the control environment. So we now have directorate records of all agency staff and consultants. We also had the staffing management approval panel, which was there to approve any new appointments and any new agency staff as well. So whilst we noted those improvements in terms of the control environment, unfortunately when we were to then dig into the compliance, we identified a number of issues again with the compliance with those controls, including some of those new controls as well. So we did have some gaps in those directorate records. We also had some issues around the procurement relation to consultants in particular, and perhaps indicating some confusion between the 2 different processes and policies around consultants and agency staff, for which there are different procurement requirements. We also identified some areas where there was a level of spend which would actually require a service contract. And again, we've looked at giving some advice in terms of policies and procedures on this going forward to make sure that those are suitably managed by contractual coverage as well. So the key findings are obviously set out here, and obviously members of the committee have received a full copy of the report, hopefully as well. So I don't intend to go into any further detail, and as the Chair's mentioned, we don't have anyone here specifically to take questions. I suppose it is one of those audits where it is a corporate policy and compliance does come down to all service areas. But obviously I'm sure we can try and take back any questions as well. So did you want me to pause at that point, Chair, before I go through the rest of the audits?
Yeah, if we just pause there, see if there's any questions on that. So can you clarify who would have ordinarily attend? Who's the director responsible for HR?
So we have an assistant director of HR who attended the previous meeting. He's actually on leave today.
Okay.
And I'm not actually sure which directorate that comes under at the moment, whereas Claire might be able to advise more.
So through you, Chair. So HR currently is reporting to the Assistant Chief Exec, which would be Guy Holloway, who's unfortunately on annual leave. So this is around the compliance issue, which is, again, as Rachel alluded to, the responsibility of all directorates, not necessarily HR, and they're about policing that compliance.
Okay, so so the understanding is HR is a responsibility of which director did you say? Guy Holloway. Right. Okay. So I think it's unfortunate they were both on holiday. We can't do anything about that, but I think we should ask them both to attend the next meeting, and then we can ask any questions, because we always ask questions about any limited assurance, and I think we can then ask that, you know, when we spoke about the Children's Trust, and we can ask questions around workforce plan there. So because I think that's a key control as well, and I think there may be some developments going on there. I don't know if Claire might be able to give us an update on where we are and with a council-wide workforce plan, because I don't know what percentage of our costs are staff related, but I imagine it's quite high.
Yes, through you, Chair. What I'd probably look to recommend on this audit is to actually have this, not just the exclusivity of HR, but also look at the directorates where that non-compliance has occurred as well, and to sort of also answer some of those issues that we are trying to address within that space. So I know that certain areas are working very closely in relating to dealing with the procurement issues, and as well as leaning into the staffing panels that we've also set up, which is proving really productive in terms of reducing our reliance on agency staff as well.
Yeah, so I think the question we should ask is, which director would be accountable if there's non-compliance? Are you saying it's the directors of the service directors, rather than the policy holder in HR. Is that your understanding?
That would be my interpretation of it, but I'm happy to take that away.
Okay.
And put that question to the executive directors.
Yeah, I think we should start that process with Guy Holloway, and then if there's a sinners list, we should ask why is there large areas of non-compliance in certain parts of the business that we should focus on, and maybe ask those, maybe not to present, but to answer some questions as for the levels of non-compliance. Councillor Lee, would you like to raise a point? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, highways maintenance contract. I'm very concerned about highways contract. The fact, yes, what the report highlights here, that's very concerning. Actually, these reports show the value, the huge value of the internal auditor. And I just want to thank Rachel, because you've got a gift of writing reports in a very intelligible way for people who may not have specialist knowledge. And I have learned so much from your report, so I just want to thank you for that. And the fact that some results have come out that are very concerning, that's obviously, we cannot hold that against you, on the contrary. And thank you for discovering that on our behalf.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for the positive feedback as well. Councillor Anslow and then Councillor Hakewell. Yeah, I was just picking up really on what Councillor Lee just said, only more specifically, in that it is amber, it's moderate and medium, which I take to be, well, it's on I don't know what it was last time, whether it was still, or whether this is a new search that you've done as an auditor. Is it something new that's been put on? And is that amber going down towards red? Was it green before? That's what I want to know, basically.
Through you, Chair. I think perhaps we're talking, is this the highways maintenance contract audit? Yes. So did you want me to move on to those audits, Chair? Sorry. No, that's okay.
Yes, okay.
Did you want me to run through that, and then perhaps I can take...
On the limited assurance, we'll move on now. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so the next report that we finalised during the period was in relation to budgetary control and savings plans. So this was looking at our arrangements for monitoring budgets, making sure we're collating the forecast outturn accurately, monitoring any changes in budgets, which we refer to as virements as well, and the controls that we're exercising in those areas. So whilst we did identify, obviously, that it's been reported that there has been an overspend on the key areas that are noted within here, from 23-24. The control arrangements, we were still satisfied, were robust in how that was managing and reporting on those forecast outturns throughout the year. How it was important that they were highlighted in terms of monitoring and reporting, and that was suitably robust and informed. We did, however, notice some areas for improvement in relation to how some of these controls were evidenced, in particular around virements. So whilst all the virements we've checked, which is the movements between budgets, were all compliant, we just wanted to see the compliance with the guidance, which said there would be a virement monitoring spreadsheet, for example. So that's just tightening up record keeping in those areas. Obviously, we did have areas of overspend in relation to particularly the Children's Trust and Adult Social Care. We were satisfied about the actions that are already being taken in those areas to try and support the forecasting and monitoring going forward as well. So on that basis, we were able to give a good assurance opinion on the control environment and the compliance, and a low organisational impact overall. So the next was in relation to highways maintenance, the highways maintenance contract. So this is the first time we've audited this contract. So this isn't, this is the first time that we've given it a good in-depth review of how the contract's being managed. It's obviously one of the council's key high-value contracts, so we wanted to get some assurance over how it's being applied in practice. Essentially, we were happy with the key controls that are in operation to make sure that there's suitable control over the payment of invoices, for example, and reporting to the relevant boards and groups in line with their relevant responsibilities to support good contract governance. We did, however, identify some risks around the vacancies within the in-house team, which I suppose links to some of those resourcing issues that were mentioned earlier. And we've also highlighted some particular areas on page 81 where we wanted to see some improvement as well, particularly around the approval of task orders and the annual final account exercise as well, to make sure that those are completed and we know the implications of those financially as well. So based on the assurance and the findings we were able to give at the time of the audit, we have given a moderate assurance opinion, which does reflect there are some areas for improvement and a medium organisational impact. And yes, that's hopefully giving an overview on that. I hopefully answered any questions as well. The next was in relation to the governance of the Children's Trust. So this is looking very much at how the council manages the relationship with the Children's Trust. And as we've seen earlier on the agenda today, we obviously receive some assurances directly from the Trust about how they are managing risks on their own directly. And this gives some assurance around how we're managing the arrangement ourselves. So this is summarised on pages 81 and 82. And we've given a moderate assurance opinion as at the time of producing this report. We've actually given a high organisational impact because of the potential implications and obviously the financial implications of some of those issues, which has always been noted as mentioned in the previous audit report around some of those financial pressures last year. So we have made some recommendations as part of that budgetary control audit, and so that will complement each other between these two audits, which will hopefully support a more informed forecast on overspends or any forecasting for the year ahead, but also to make sure we're happy around the basis and the underlying assumptions within that medium-term financial plan that was mentioned earlier, including things like sensitivity analysis around placements. So if we know that's an area of pressure, how does that impact on different potential scenarios within that medium-term financial plan as well? So the next was in relation to public health contract management. So we haven't given an assurance opinion on this because it was really just following up on the action plan from the last audit, and also in light of the fact that there is there's procurement activity underway to re-procure these contracts as well. So there wasn't really that value in a full audit and new assurance opinion at this point. But we were able to evidence that there has been improvement in terms of how some of those actions had been taken forward from the previous audit to make sure we're getting the best possible performance in some of those areas. We'd also seen the re-procurement process for some of the health checks, which was introducing a new dynamic purchasing system, which basically means that we have that 12-month terms and potential extensions, and it gives that more of an incentive for good performance on some of those contracts as well, which will hopefully support that delivery going forward as well. The next audit was in relation to treasury management. So this is one of those regular audits that we perform on a regular basis on one of the key financial controls around how we're managing our investments and any debts. So we were happy to see the treasury management strategy that was in place, which has been aligned with the SIPFA codes, which are currently in place. The only issue that we identified in terms of aligning with those codes was around the regularity of the performance reporting, which has already been addressed for 24-25, but we just had to note that was an area where it wasn't fully aligned with the code in 23-24. We've also seen that testing that we conducted on investments, making best use of surplus funds, and enforcing a regular segregation of duties were working effectively in practice. And we didn't identify any issues or any areas for improvement in those areas. So overall, we've given a good level of assurance for the control environment and substantial assurance for compliance, which is obviously good to see in one of those key financial control areas. And the next was in relation to local taxation, which this year we focused specifically on exemptions. So here we're looking at both council tax and business rates, and any exemptions or discounts which can be applied in those areas. So overall, we were satisfied with the controls in place for awarding those exemptions. So when someone first applies for the exemptions, making sure that they're fully evidenced and they go through the right rigorous process. But we did identify some areas for improvement in terms of the regular review and the ongoing entitlement for some of those discounts or exemptions, both for council tax and business rates. So we've highlighted those within the action plan with some recommendations to strengthen the controls. And overall, we've given a moderate assurance opinion for the environment and moderate for compliance as well, with a low organisational impact given the sample that we looked at. And lastly, we have now the first of the financial system audits from 23-24. So members of the committee will remember I gave a limitation within the audit opinion for 23-24 that we hadn't yet received those hosted service financial system audits for the financial year. This year they were undertaken in a different way, so rather than the lead authority that led on that particular service doing the audit for their own service, we actually rotated them. So this year accounts payable was actually performed by my own team in Northamptonshire, but is delivered by Cambridgeshire County Council. And we are waiting for the reports on the other financial systems. We've now actually received one more report, which I'll be able to bring to the next committee, on income processing, and the others hopefully will be finalised soon, and hopefully I'll be able to bring them to a future committee meeting as well. So in relation to that accounts payable audit, which was performed by my team, as I say, but is of systems that are managed and delivered by Cambridgeshire County Council, I'm pleased that we were able to give a good assurance opinion, and this is consistent with previous financial years. Essentially, the process is fully automated within the system, so it is enforcing that segregation and approval controls over any orders that go through the ERP Gold system. There's also good use of the functionality within the system, and those key controls around supplier maintenance, invoice processing and backs payment runs all were as expected, and we didn't identify any areas of concern. We did identify some areas for further improvement, which included some actions which remained outstanding from the previous audit. I know these do continue to be followed up by Cambridgeshire County Council, and we will receive further updates. And we also identified some further issues around record keeping, particularly around authorising the right officers for manual payment file processing, for example, and the review of monthly reconciliation. So again, it's that timely completion of some of those records as well. So as I say, good level of assurance for design and compliance with those controls. And also within the report is an update on the implementation of recommended actions arising from the audits. So we have had 18 actions implemented since the last audit update. We currently have 119 which are overdue, and that has been again reviewed by members of the Corporate Leadership Network. And we will continue to follow up on the progress with those and report to future meetings. But an overview is provided on page 98 in table 2. And you also have an update on all of those which fall into that category of over 3 months overdue and high priority on pages 99 and 100 of the papers. And finally, Chair, just before I finish, and then I'll be happy to take any questions, there is also within the report an additional recommendation today around a proposed amendment to the audit plan, subject to an Ofsted inspection later in the year, which may render the review of the corporate parenting audit of less value this year if we already have assurances from Ofsted, which we're expecting perhaps in the autumn of this year. If that audit does go ahead, what we propose is that the corporate parenting audit be removed from the audit plan, and instead we divert those days to a review of educational support services where some risks have been identified where assurance from internal audit would be welcomed. So that's an additional recommendation today as well within the paper. So I'll be happy to take any questions, Chair, on any of the detail.
Thank you for that comprehensive update. See if there's any questions. Councillor Hakewell and then Councillor Eakins.
Thank you, Chair. I did show earlier, but I guess you missed me. Just going through some of these findings. Page 78, key findings, agency workers and consultants. That is pretty horrific. Our friend Mr. Caller at the County Council, where similar things happened, I'm sure Councillor Eakins remembers that, made the point you've got to do the boring stuff well. And this is not doing the boring stuff well. When you actually read this through, gaps in compliance, agency staff outside the OPUS framework, agency worker not been included, but then it goes on to say not being procured in line with contract procedure rules. This is nothing to do with our colleague Rachel, because she's giving us the story. What we're supposed to be here to do is to drill down into this, and I don't accept whether it's scrutiny or us. It's the same 326,000 people who we look after, and if there's a linkage then, Chair, that should be to you through to the Chair of Scrutiny, which is subject to different errors in waiver. IR35 I thought was a massive issue, and the HMRC can come down on like a ton of bricks on IR35 failures, agency and consultant. So we get to the box and it says compliance limited red, organisational impact high red. When you go to page 86, and Rachel has just pointed out, there are 119 recommendations overdue for implementation as at the 30th of July. And now we're at the 14th of August. There's absolutely no point in us coming here, having training, learning and listening to professionals, if at the beginning it says we've got to note it, this famous noted. When we sat in Thrapston Chamber and were trained on scrutiny by the, whatever their name is for government scrutiny, they said we should not be noting, we should be digging into these things and doing something. So page 86, 4.1, where weaknesses and opportunities for improvement are identified by audit testing, recommendations are made and an action plan agreed with management. Well, we should be seeing that action plan. That should be us understanding that this particular issue is going wrong. And I don't know how we change this. If this is the way the committees always work, so be it. But I also don't remember scrutiny being able to pick up on some of these things. So that is key findings. What are we going to do about agency workers and consultants? How are we as a committee, on behalf of the community, going to pursue this? And I don't see anything. I'm not just going to note it. That's the first one. And then on the highways contract, we were trailed with a wonderful press release that we're spending £1.5 million on sprucing up the Northamptonshire. How have we audited the spend of that £1.5 million? Because I can tell you, I was wandering around large parts of the constituency a few weeks ago, and I've never seen it look so scruffy. Road signs covered by vegetation, lines in the middle of the road. So how did we scrutinise the £1.5 million spruce up? Those are my two questions. But I am forthright and I am animated on this, because there's absolutely no point in me coming out on a Monday afternoon to note things and not do something about it, because not doing something about it is what happened to the county council and multiple other councils.
I don't know if you was paying attention earlier on when we spoke about that report, and we're asking them to come to the next meeting. I don't know if you was paying attention earlier on when we said we're asking them to come to the next meeting. They were unable to attend today. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't understand why you made that point, but there we go. Okay. Any other questions, Councillor Eakins?
Yeah, just a couple on the highways. Part of the highways is 81, 82, I think. 8081, sorry. What's a little bit here is concerning is that out of the 6 main management team, only 33% of it's filled. Only 2 managers, so to speak, are in there. But what's crucial about that is the two of them are very critical to complying and delivering this programme for us. And one's a contract inspector and the other one's a QS. And if you haven't got anybody going out inspecting or managing the inspections of the installations that they've been doing and the repairs, and then you haven't got a QS there telling you how much material has been used, we're still getting billed for it. Is there any wonder why further down is that they've got a number of jobs outstanding? Basically, they're doing work without any costings attached to it. And that's a big issue when you into construction, when you're doing that, when you're asking somebody that they've gone out and they've done the work, and then they're going to ask you for a fee for doing it, and you've got absolutely no idea of the quantity or the quality of the work's being done. Because if it's a road work, people are still driving over it. And then you go and revisit 6 months later because it's probably not being done correctly or not used the right materials on it. So I was a little bit concerned to see that there were ambers on all 3 of those for them. And I would have probably at least thought one of them, if not 2 of them, would be in a low red, which would be the organisation impact and the compliance. If your managers are not there to do the job, to make sure you're doing your job, trust me, the job ain't going to be done. And if there's no one to bring them to book, so to speak, it's just they'll just in working in the construction industry all my life is, you know, when the cat's away, the mice certainly do play. So I'm a bit surprised at that one. But maybe we should have, Chair, to have Highways to come in, or Keir, to explain the reasons why those roles this far on still haven't been completed and filled. Because I do believe that they are critical roles to deliver that service to us. And of course, everybody thinks it's our fault anyway, regardless. And this just adds fuel to it.
Okay, if I could ask Rachel to comment how you had landed on those opinions and what your thinking was behind those, and if there is any consideration that perhaps should be higher, maybe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I completely agree, and that's why we've drawn out in particular that those were the roles that we were vacant, because that did cause me some concern around the risk that exposes. I think in terms of the overall assurance opinion, obviously I've drawn that out because that's one of my key concerns around some of the highest risks in terms of the findings. But as an overall, taking into all the consideration of all of the testing that we did and all of the control environment, we felt that it was in that moderate level, because yes, there is a medium level of risk. I think we define it as in terms of moderate. But essentially the service is being delivered, the contract is operating. We have got some of those performance indicators working, the invoices are being reviewed in the right way, jobs are being completed. So I think on that basis we felt there was moderate assurance. It was something we did talk through with the senior management in this area, and I can assure you it was a debate about the assurance opinion at that point. And we were assured of some of the mitigating controls that were in place within the service to try and manage some of these risks. And on that basis, we felt comfortable that we were able to give a moderate level of assurance at this point, but it's probably an area where we would want to revisit next year, certainly.
Yeah, that's good news. I know that we've got our own inspectors in highways that we actually employ. Do we have our own QSs as well?
Through your Chair, as I understand it, that is one of the roles. So the roles that we've talked about here that are vacant are council roles. So that quantity surveyor role is within the council's establishment. Yes. Yes. That's okay.
Okay, I think that perhaps answers the compensatory controls that were relied on to bring that down to an acceptable level. But I think it might be worth getting a comment from the director responsible, because it's been raised by a couple of people, well, 3 people now, that it's quite significant. So I think if we could ask for an explanation, just a brief note from, I think it's George Chandler, is it? Yeah. Councillor Ansley?
Yeah, I'd support that actually. Having picked up on that one as a point that I was concerned about, because it's to do again with staffing, isn't it? And we've already talked about agency. So although HR is, we're going to be talking about agency staff with Guy Hollowell, hopefully. This needs to be followed up, I would have thought, as well with the executive member. Surely the executive member needs to know that there are gaps there, that and it's having an impact on the audit.
Yeah, I think we can start joining some of the dots up here, I think. I think there's some themes emerging around, you know,
Definitely.
and then we talked earlier about workforce plans and things like that.
Yeah.
And then you can see repeat themes, and it's, a lot of it's links back to this same narrative. So hopefully we'll get that note from Highways, and then we'll have the further chance, well, the chance to question officers further at the next meeting. Councillor Hakewell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies if I wasn't concentrating earlier, but what does them coming to the next meeting actually mean? Does it mean we get a report and dig into this, or does someone come and give a verbal? And the second point, to the last point you just made, the 1.5 million sprucing up, can we put that on the agenda as to how we found value for money in that 1.5 when whoever it is you've just decided is going to come? So what does coming to the next meeting mean, which is another 2 months, potentially, with these failures going on?
Sorry? Yeah, so Claire, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Chair. sort of going back to sort of the agency stuff, and I suppose just want to provide you some assurance that, as Rachel has alluded to, CLT have recognised that there are areas that we need to focus on and areas that we need to have recourse in. So we have put in place the staffing review panel, which all agency staff now have a contract end date, and we are trying to ensure that we understand the map of that world in terms of compliance issues. So our Chief Exec has also reinforced that by communicating directly with all CLN members, which is your executive directors and existing directors, to ensure that they are following that compliance and they actually implement the rules as is set out in the policies, particularly around IR35. In the short term, we have redressed some of the issues that we have come across. So contracts have been ended and new contracts have been taken out to ensure that we are now compliant in areas where we may not have been compliant. But I do want to reiterate, sometimes there is that balance of risk between ensuring that we can deliver a service within our statutory powers and then retrospectively being compliant with agency staff that we may have had to get in to deliver a service, or we would have failed delivering that service. So that can range from providing tuition for a child who has complex needs, who can't attend school, to agency staff actually being able to ensure that our bin rounds can actually happen. So there's areas of risk that we need to make sure we can accommodate within that space. So there is, we don't want non-compliance, obviously, and obviously CLT are working very hard to ensure that that's not the case, but there will be areas where emergency requirements might have to be put in place and stood up, and those are generally going to be around your vulnerable children, for example. And also just sort of reiterate that, from my perspective, the control environment that we have here, there is not what we're looking at. It is just a compliance. So it's around, financially, obviously it's more expensive to have agencies, but through the One Council policy and through some of the work where we're trying to accelerate some of those issues and getting the restructures done, we're trying to sort of shift ourselves away from that agency environment. So our statistics at the moment are showing really good progress in that. The sort of agency staff's going down by about 24%. We're having significant increase in recruitment, and our retention is also improving as well.
Sorry, to you, Chair. Those issues of...
Just a second, sorry. So the other point was was about the ability to question people on this. I think any limited assurance, the relevant director and if applicable, the assistant director are invited to attend. Unfortunately, as we mentioned earlier, they were unable to attend, and that's why they're coming back to the next meeting. So that's the normal level of challenge that they get at this committee.
Sorry, Chair, just to come back on that, there should be a compliance issue. We all know, anyone who's been a councillor for a year or more knows that bin men sometimes, or bin personnel, sometimes don't turn up. There should be a policy that allows that to happen, the same with an educational need that's very urgent for a child that needs it. So non-compliance, there should be compliance with an emergency process rather than a non-compliance with a more sort of dinosaur-type process. But again, I expect we will hear that next meeting.
Councillor Eakins?
Yeah, Chair, I think what we need to do here really is define the distinction between audit and scrutiny. Our job here is to find out the reasons why certain things aren't being complied with in the compliance structure of things and the accountability. But drilling down into the actual finances of how things work, that's not really our job, that's scrutiny's job. And if we find out there's certain issues within our audits that are ringing bells or alarm bells in certain situations, then that should then be passed over to scrutiny to delve down deeper into why those elements are the way they are. But for our purpose here, we're just here as as auditors, not just here as auditors, but ours is to make sure that the compliances and the governance is there, to make sure that we are doing the right things, or the council is being run in the right way and is being accountable for the spending that we do. And I think, personally, I'm not sure, but I think that's the main role of what we do here. I think we should just personally stay with the audit and then let scrutiny do the scrutiny and pass it over if we need to.
Just to come back, in the last 3 years, how many times has this committee drilled down to scrutiny for an issue such as Councillor Eakins has said, and scrutiny done something about it? How many times?
We'll get back to you on that one after the meeting. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I'll move to the recommendation. Sorry, there's a comment there from Sanjit.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just on the scrutiny point, there is a process which councillors can follow in terms of adding matters to the scrutiny programme. There's a matrix to be completed. If members do want to add work to the scrutiny work programme, they can visit that process. Happy with Dem Services officers to speak to members around that, and then appropriate items can be added. But there is a specific process to follow there.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Sorry, Chair, but just to come back, does that rely on a single member to go? And I'd quite like the number of times that those member inquiries have gone to scrutiny and been enacted over the last 3 years. I've tried.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to take that away and confirm via the Councillor Bulletin in terms of precisely what that process is. It's important that it's clear for all members, and then that can be circulated, the appropriate information given, and the links to the relevant forms and policy as well, which should hopefully support members going forward.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I know the process. I was asking how many times a member of the council has put a form into scrutiny and it been enacted, because I'm often told that is the way, but it doesn't seem to function.
Okay. Before I go to the recommendation, just to make members aware, we were intending to bring housing, because we'd identified themes before around housing. So we'd had a number of areas which we had concerns around over quite a period of time. They were asked to attend this meeting. Unfortunately, for reasons of unavailability, they were unable to. So they'll be attending the next meeting as well. So it'll probably be quite a long meeting for the next one. So they've been asked to attend because there's obviously key risks and with some key sources of assurance that we require from them. That will be coming to the next meeting in September. So going to the recommendation, it's recommended that we note the internal audit progress report attached as Appendix 1 and consider the main issues arising and approve the proposed amendment to the internal audit plan, which was explained, removing the corporate parenting and replacing this with an audit of educational support services. Can I look for a proposer for that, please? Councillor Eakins, a seconder. Councillor Level. And all those in favour, please show. Any abstentions? Any against? Thank you. Abstention. Okay. Yes, sorry, Councillor Lee.
I'm probably too late, but don't we add on our concerns about our intention to call someone in from highways and to talk to someone about HR? Doesn't that need to be in the recommendation? Maybe it doesn't, sorry.
Yeah, so they're going to be coming in from that initial report, so we can question them on that. On the highways ones, we arranged for I think I asked for a written note from the relevant officer to provide to members of the committee. I think if that's not sufficient, then I think we raise that at the next meeting, then we ask them to come in, and so hopefully it will be sufficient. If there's no other matters to raise, I'll bring the meeting